Start.
Corey, I believe everyone's here and ready to go. Yeah, you can start.
Okay, thank you. And good morning, everyone. And before I get started, I'll just ask that you mute your video and your screen and your audio, because we're going to have a number of people on this call. And if we have too much video, we lose capacity. So good morning and welcome to this all online meeting of CANDO. I am Corey Robinson Rosenberg, Professor of Pediatrics and Psychiatry at the University of Colorado School of Medicine Anschutz Medical Campus. CANDO has been meeting quarterly for almost 10 years. The purpose was to create a forum around implementation of the Autism Commission strategic plan. However, it should be noted that we are not just about autism. We are concerned with all neurodevelopmental disabilities. I want to note that CANDO is an ad hoc committee of the Colorado Developmental Disabilities Council and has been hosted here at Anschutz throughout these years. Today we have a session that I am really excited about. As you hopefully know, Colorado is an employment-first state. We heard from our first speaker this morning about that legislation a couple years ago. Out of his and the Employment First Advisory Partnership efforts, along with the Division of Vocational Rehab, we now have a Colorado Office of Employment First. So it is now my pleasure to introduce my longtime colleague and friend, Bob Lawhead, Policy Director of the Colorado Developmental Disability Council and one of the chairs of the Employment First Advisory Committee. So Bob, we really look forward to your updates and then introduction of the Office of Employment First. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. Well, it's really exciting to be here today and to measure the progress we've made over the last several years in Colorado's Employment First initiative. It's really exciting to have over 100 people registered for this event today. Obviously, we have a lot of interest in Colorado in these efforts now, and that is appreciated and exciting. So, is my screen up and running? Does the presentation look okay? You ready to go?
Looks great, Bob.
All right, thank you. Okay, so what in the heck is this Employment First stuff? It really is a systems change effort. And so Employment First is our effort here in Colorado to change our system to support people with disabilities, including people with the most significant disabilities. And by that, I mean people who have traditionally not been seen as candidates for regular community employment. So the classic definition is in bullet number 2 here. Employment in the general workforce is the first and preferred outcome in the provision of publicly funded services for all working age citizens with disabilities, regardless of level of disability. So you'll see the publicly funded services referred to there, and that really refers to this idea of changing our governmentally funded systems to better support people in their efforts to become employed in the regular workforce. A number of statements are provided by APSE, the Association of Persons Supporting Employment First, and actually that's how we were originally characterized. It's now the Association of Persons, I'm sorry, it used to be the Association of Persons in Supported Employment, and we shifted that name as Employment First became more nationally known as a movement, and so we are part of that broad national movement. But as APSE says, the low participation rate of people with significant disabilities in the employment workforce is unacceptable, and if people are going to reduce current conditions that they may experience, including poverty, dependence, and isolation, we really need to push the Employment First initiative through. Central is that all working age adults and youth with disabilities can work in jobs when the right services and supports are provided. So this gets into best practice services and supports that we have worked on over the last several decades, but actually we've been aware of for some time now. The idea of customized employment, which is central to this, came about, broadly speaking, through the Department of Labor as we turned into the new century. Its dissemination nationally and here in Colorado is occurring right now and hasn't kept up with some of those national efforts. But that's part of what's exciting about what we're doing in Colorado right now, is that we are figuring out how to put into place these best practice services and supports that will allow all people, no matter how significant their disability, to work in the regular workforce. Just as all individuals require some level of support and assistance in the workplace, so it is with people with disabilities. And our effort here in Colorado began with Senate Bill 16077, Employment First for persons with disabilities, that we got passed through the legislature that year, and basically began moving forward with that later in 2016 as we implemented that bill. So a lot of the basis for Colorado's Employment First efforts are within the legislative declaration of that bill. And this slide describes why the bill and how the bill is structured. So the value of work is presumed to be important for all of us and is obvious. It's a major way that we build our social connections, and of course is a major way that we spend our time in this culture. Working in regular employment is highly valued in society. We talked about in the philosophical underpinnings the fact that there are structural barriers for people with disabilities, and particularly people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, that results in 85% of those individuals being under or unemployed. We basically proposed a solution in changing state policy to promote best practice and to focus on extending those efforts, again, to all people with disabilities, no matter how significant their disability. And we also emphasized the fact that this is consistent with the Olmstead ruling, the Supreme Court's ruling that occurred in 1999. This was an effort by the Supreme Court to clarify the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title II, which basically says that when you're using public dollars, and specifically when the state uses public dollars, they must provide services to people with disabilities in the most integrated setting. The other things that happened just prior to passage of this legislation was that in 2014, we had the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act passed federally, and had the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services final setting rule laid out for us. Both of those happened in 2014. WIOA came out and defined this idea of competitive integrated employment and basically stated that this should be an opportunity. Regular work at regular wages, just alongside regular workers, is something that should be available to all people who experience disability. And the settings rule basically is trying to get the home and community-based services waivers aligned with this idea that work is important and that most integrated setting is something that we all need to change to when we come to providing services, state services to people with disabilities. The final settings rule is scheduled to be implemented, and we've been working on this in Colorado for some time now, but it's scheduled to be implemented in 2021. So what is this ADA Olmstead piece? Well, it's basically saying that you've got to allow people to no longer be segregated in segregated day programs, in sheltered workshops, in pre-vocational services, all of these things that, with the best intent through the years, we've created to serve people with more significant disabilities in work, but that just is not consistent with current thinking and current best practice. This is, as you can see in this slide, one bullet says this is the law of the land, and there have been several court cases that have been brought forward. Rhode Island and Oregon are where this has happened most visibly, where the court has issued consent decrees for those states to systematically desegregate their employment and day services over 10-year periods. We have avoided that here in Colorado, but we have to understand that if we were not moving forward with employment first, these kinds of legal ramifications could come into play. So it's important to understand what CIE is, and it's really quite simple, but what you see here in the bullets is the state definition as stated in Senate Bill 77. Basically, it just means regular work for regular pay. It means getting rid of this idea that people with disabilities should work for sub-minimum wage, get rid of this idea that people must be segregated in order to work effectively. It's just real work for real wages, like anybody else would experience. So it's a pretty simple concept, but of course, we figured we had to get a definition in there, so that's what this is. So one of the primary pieces of Senate Bill 77 is the establishment of the Employment First Advisory Partnership. The idea here in the legislation was that this collaborative group would come together and develop a strategic plan that would then go to the Colorado General Assembly, and that the focus of that plan was to expand competitive integrated employment opportunity for people with disabilities in Colorado. It's worked out quite well. As Corey mentioned, I co-chair with Marilee Boyland and Catherine Carroll that group, and have done so over the last several years. The cooperation and collaboration has been amazing, and that's part of why we have expanded Employment First in the state so successfully over the last several years. It includes these 5 listed state departments: the Colorado Department of Education, the Department of Higher Education, the Colorado Department of Human Services, Labor and Employment, and Healthcare Policy and Financing, which of course is our state Medicaid agency. And the group has been further defined to include a variety of community stakeholders representing people with disabilities, families, and other interested parties in the community. Basically, after this mission as established in 77 to create this strategic plan that would advise the departments and the legislature on how we can move forward with this effort, the EFAP continues to meet to provide revisions to that plan and to advise on implementation of that plan. So this is a graphic of all the different pieces of legislation that have passed over the last several years. So you can see we've been pretty active over the last 5 years. This gives you a feel for how that has moved forward. The interesting thing is that as we passed additional pieces of legislation after 1677, they have supported that strategic plan that's outlined in that initial bill. So I'll show you how that lines up in a moment. But here are the 8 strategic plan recommendations. Number 1, to produce data that measures Colorado compliance with Olmstead. So again, trying to get data to show that we are moving away from these segregated, non-integrated kinds of settings for services for people and moving toward regular employment settings and outcomes. Implementing department-wide employment first policies and practices within those departments that I just mentioned, that are the 5 EFAP agency partners. Number 3 is that evidence-based and evidence-informed training piece that is so critically important if we are to be successful in these efforts. And a communication plan, making sure that employers, educators, people with disabilities, and families are aware of this information to help bring about a change in the expectation that these critical stakeholders have for themselves, for their family members, and as they go through the educational process and then the employment process. This piece, item number 4 here, is just so gosh darn important, because if we do not get the word out that we now understand how to employ people with the most significant disabilities, we, in my opinion, are doomed for failure, potentially. Item 5, or recommendation 5, is to create the Office of Employment First to help implement employment first policies, practices, training, and to expand outcomes for people. The whole idea in number 6 of making sure that we have appropriate funding structures is repeated time and again in the national efforts to make all this work. It's one thing to be able to train job coaches and employment support professionals on how to support people appropriately, how to find jobs for people, how to train people or assist people in their training efforts to get employed and to understand how to do their jobs and keep those jobs. But you can't do that without funding structures that support that. And so item 6 is another important piece of the puzzle. We wanted to make sure that we looked at best practice pilot projects. These kinds of projects can help inform us as we move forward and provide examples of success that help to persuade those critical stakeholders that all of this is possible and exciting. And then finally, for the state of Colorado to become a model employer, to show that people with disabilities can really provide the state, county, and local governmental entities with a real advantage as those individuals become integrated into the workforce within our public entities. So let me just briefly talk about 145. If you don't know, SB stands for Senate Bill, 18 stands for the year that it was passed, and then 145 is the actual number of the bill. So implement Employment First recommendations was our effort directly after the Employment First bill to get some of these things into statute. EFAP recommendation 3 that we just went through is addressed in this first one, which requires well-trained certified employment support professionals within DVR and HCPF. Those job coaches are funded by those 2 entities, by the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation and the Colorado Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing. And so this effort directly relates to the fact that over a 5-year period, we will assure that the staff doing that work are fully trained in best practice. Adding discovery, which is a customized employment-based assessment, to what the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation pays for, was seen as another critical piece and was addressed within this legislation. And then finally, we fine-tuned some of the original Senate Bill 77 detail on what data we would collect. And so the comprehensive employment and day service data, again, is an effort to assure that we are moving toward integrated services for people. And this is detailed at the county level, so we can actually measure this kind of progress, not only in the state, but also county by county. The 2019 Employment First appropriation, or I should say appropriations, because we had 2 of them in 2019, were really important for expanding the progress and expanding our ability to actually meet these recommendations within that strategic plan. So it created the Colorado Office of Employment First, which the rest of this presentation is dedicated to. That really addresses recommendations 4 and 5 that we talked about. It added 4 positions to the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation on benefits planning, state staff training, state as model employer, and individual placement and support model of supported employment, which directly addressed EFAP recommendation number 8. It established an outcome-based rate incentive pilot, which is, again, addressing that whole idea of how do we get the funding to make sure that it supports these efforts, and then expanded the customized employment pilot that had been already put into place by DVR prior to the legislation, expanded this pilot statewide so that instead of just being based in the Denver metro area, we can see people in our rural communities being impacted by this best practice. So what is this idea of customized employment? Customized employment is a flexible process designed to personalize the employment relationship between job candidates and the employer that meets the needs of both. As I mentioned before, this was publicized in 2001 by the U.S. Department of Labor Office of Disability Employment Policy. The idea is to better identify the strengths and interests that a person has, not through typical assessments, but by really getting to know the person. And so that's a reference to this idea of discovery, where we're trying to discover the interests, the strengths, the conditions for success in employment that each individual brings to bear. And then who does this benefit? Well, as I've mentioned several times, this is seen as benefiting all people with disabilities, but particularly those people with the most significant disability. And so this benefits people who traditionally have not been considered for competitive employment and instead have been considered for segregation or group employment or sheltered work. So this is an example of a young man who has customized employment at assisting him to do his job at Cosmos Pizza, as opposed to doing all the jobs that a person at Cosmos does. This young man assembles pizza boxes. So you can see him gazing at his latest creation of pizza boxes there beside him. This gentleman isn't a reader, so he doesn't read. He has a significant speech issue as far as people being able to understand him, so he couldn't take pizza orders over the phone. He's not a driver. He doesn't drive a car, so he couldn't deliver pizzas. But by customizing his job to focus in on what he does and does well, he basically, his job is to make those pizza boxes. And he appreciates the independence that a paycheck brings, because this young man really enjoys downloading videos and audio files onto his iPad. And without that money that comes in from a paycheck, he would be left with not being able to do that. And he also gets a benefit that not all of us get in our jobs, in that he gets a free slice of pizza after every shift. For those of you who know me well, you know who this young man is. He happens to be my son, Jess, who is now 24 years old and is getting ready to go back to Cosmos Pizza after being on a hiatus because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the pending legislation that I think many of you know that we plan to complete the general session for Colorado on Saturday, and we were not able to get some of this latest legislation through this year because of the pandemic and the limited amount of time that we have. But House Bill 20-1263, Eliminate Subminimum Wage Employment, was introduced. It would have required a 4-year phase out of subminimum wage. But in order to assure that people who were impacted by that, which would be approximately 500 people throughout Colorado, we wanted to make sure that we beefed up our employment services and supports. And so it had a number of areas that you can see in bullet number 2 that we wanted to expand, which included expanded career exploration, site monitoring for people who had more significant disabilities who needed kind of a monitor in the workplace, benefits counseling, access to the Medicaid buy-in program, and then again, more closely analyzing some of those funding issues. We also were trying to reauthorize EFAP, the Employment First Advisory Partnership. We will move both of those bill efforts over to next year. And I'd like to just finish by talking about this quote by Helen Keller: "The only thing worse than being blind is having sight but no vision." Colorado has the vision for Employment First, but there is real need for us to continuously follow this up over the next several years if we are going to actually realize this. We need to get people with disabilities and family members educated about these issues. We need to have our schools, our teachers, and particularly our transition from school to work teachers, more familiar with these best practices. And if we can continue to push forward with this, we have a real opportunity to even lead the nation in these efforts. Thanks very much for your interest. I appreciate your time. And I'd like to move forward with introducing Patricia. Patricia Henke, hired as Colorado's Office of Employment First Director last September, has worked in the field of vocational rehabilitation for over 25 years and has held positions as job coach, vocational evaluator, job work adjustment instructor, supervisor, director of community employment services at various private nonprofits. Patricia has also worked for the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation for 14 years, where she developed a variety of programs assisting people with significant disabilities in supported employment. She is passionate about all individuals with disabilities having access to a person-centered, evidence-based approach to competitive integrated employment and aligning systems and funding structures that are accessible, and finally working with employers to develop an inclusive workforce. Please welcome Patricia.
Thank you, Bob. I think we're gonna have there we go. Thanks, Layla. That was really fast. So Bob, I think everybody's hungry now for Cosmo's Pizza.
Yeah.
That was my reaction. Thanks so much for sharing Jess's recent employment success. And I think it just illustrates what this work is all about. So really love seeing that. So good morning, everyone. I'm Patricia Henke, the Director of the Office of Employment First. And I want to thank you for being here. We have such a great turnout. I'm seeing 90 in attendance. And so we're so appreciative of you taking this time out of your day. And also wanted to thank JFK Partners for hosting this webinar and really giving Employment First the platform for this entire meeting and getting the word out. So appreciate that. Next slide, please. So we have the rest of the meeting is a really full agenda, and I'm going to speak with you for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to let lots of other individuals talk with you. I'm going to talk a little bit about just the Office of Employment First and what we're up to. But then you're going to hear from the rest of the team. We're going to, Melanie Hansbrook is going to talk to you about benefits counseling. Brian Dean's going to talk further about customized employment. Deirdre Sage will talk with you about the individual placement and support model. And then Jennifer Stewart and Teresa Nguyen will speak on our work with youth and families. And then you'll hear from Aaron Taylor on evaluation monitoring on Employment First. And then after that, we wanted to really hear from our state agency partners. As you heard from Bob, you know, everything that has led up to the implementation of the Colorado Office of Employment First took just tremendous partnership and working together along a shared aligned vision. And we could not do that without the partnership of our state agencies. So we have Adam Tucker with Healthcare Policy and Financing, Megan Green with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. And then the Colorado Department of Human Services, we have Leah Andrews with the Office of Behavioral Health and Karen Farrington with MindSource. Next slide, please. So as Bob mentioned, and just because it's been a short time frame, I actually was hired November 1st and then was able to hire the rest of our team in December. So we're at about a 6-month time frame that we've been in operation. And I wanted to highlight kind of the arrangement of how we were developed. And so, you know, the budget appropriation that Bob spoke to for the Office of Employment First did come to the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. And we were fortunate enough to leverage their federal match. They have a really nice match opportunity to multiply the dollars that are received. So with that, having that opportunity through DVR, and then through that, have an interagency agreement with the University of Colorado at JFK Partners. Next slide, please. So here is our newly launched vision and mission statement for the Colorado Office of Employment First. One of the things we've just done in the last really few weeks is launched our branding, our messaging, our logo, and this was, and in doing all of this, it has been a collaborative approach with our team, but then also the Employment First Advisory Partnership has a communications committee that we ask for input from often so that we make sure we're all remain aligned with the messaging. And ultimately, you know, our vision is to develop that culture, and our responsibility is to develop that culture within Colorado of having inclusive, meaningful, and competitive employment for all individuals. Really taking what Bob was talking about in terms of the vision and building it up and having this legislation and this appropriation, the Office of Employment First's charge is really to take that and implement it and make it happen in Colorado. And so you'll see a lot of alignment in what Bob was talking about. And so how we're going to do that through our mission is, you know, to lead Colorado towards equitable employment for individuals. But we have 3 bullets here that we have to continue the collaboration with EFAP, with our advisory committee, with the state agency partners, with families, with individuals with disabilities and employers and service providers. I mean, the entities and the individuals that we're collaborating with is really vast and is a large initiative to bring everyone in alignment with employment first practices and principles. And then systems innovation is really aligned with what Bob was saying around policy and rate structures and really implementing evidence-based practices, which I'll speak to a little bit further in the presentation. And then training excellence. We are developing training and delivering training, and we really value the team at the Office of Employment First values training that are in evidence-based practices, but also has a performance-based training approach where individuals are required really to demonstrate proficiency in the practice before being qualified to deliver the service, and then also having ongoing learning and practice communities. Next slide. So I have on these next couple of slides just our 4 quadrants of responsibility. So in our statement of work, in our interagency agreement, there's 4 key areas that the Office of Employment First is working on actively. And so the first is curriculum development and training. And this is the area that we really launched early, really wanted to start implementing and having deliverables and increasing service provider capacity with employment specialists around the state. And so you're going to be hear from our curriculum developer trainers throughout the presentation. I want to emphasize here, a highlight in that area, the first bullet, the evidence-based or evidence-informed training, mentoring, and learning communities. And it's a passion area of mine because it's a new approach to culture in state agencies, with service provider organizations. And what we know and what you'll hear is that a lot of the activities that occur that are job readiness in nature, as Bob was mentioning, pre-vocational services or situational assessment, work adjustment services, research shows that those do not prepare individuals to go to work. And so we need to think differently about how we're approaching the job development and employment process. What we also know is they're cost effective. When we really take a hard look at service delivery and do comparisons, when we do use evidence-based or evidence-informed practices, we find that it yields to higher outcomes and also higher and effective outcomes, but then also to cost efficiency. So the second area here is communications. We are, as we speak, are developing a website. We have a landing page, and you see that employmentfirstcolorado.org is our website. And by the end of June, we'll have about 3 pages that will be completed. And then we're continuing to build that website. So we invite you to go to that website and just kind of check out our initial landing page and subscribe to our newsletter, which will be launching today, our first newsletter. So we hope that you get registered on our listserv, or if you're on the CANDO listserv or JFK, you'll also receive the newsletter. So we're excited about that. But that's going to be the focal point of all Employment First communications in Colorado. We invite you to outreach to us directly. We're a very accessible group and team, and we want to be partnering with you. And then you're going to hear about the benefits calculator or the website from Melanie in a little bit. Next slide, please. The other 2 areas, technical assistance, I think that's pretty straightforward in terms of being available to these entities, and coordination, evaluation, monitoring, sustainability. Erin Taylor is our program evaluator, grant writer, and so she's going to speak to this later on in the presentation about our targeted data measures, how we're monitoring EFAP recommendations, and then also our rate restructuring project. The other area to know is that the Office of Employment First is also responsible for looking at sustainability. I mean, the funding that we have is through June 2022. And so we are just about to enter year 2 of our contract, July 1st, or interagency agreement. So we are actively looking at diversified ways to develop revenue and to sustain the Office of Employment First beyond June 2022. Next slide, please. So a few slides here just on our data so far, our outcomes. So we, as I said, most of our team was hired in December and really had to kind of onboard everyone and bring everybody together, kind of establish our goals initially and get started, because our time frame is short to really make an impact. And so this data is through March of this year. And you can see kind of the focus areas that we've had in customized employment is the largest. Second is individual placement and support. And those are 2 of the support employment, customized employment models that you will hear about. And then benefits counseling as well. Employment First, just getting the word out about Employment First practices and principles. And then you see smaller slices are around brain injury, and then transitioning youth is an area that we have further data on here in the next slide. Next slide, please. And then this is just an illustration by attendees. You can see that our largest attendance rate has been around benefits counseling. It's a really sought after topic. And so we're really going to be doing a lot of work moving forward in that area, as well as the others. As you can see in our first quarter of data, transitioning youth and families was pretty low. And so we want to show you what happened, and because it's what happened after March. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that in April, it's actually April, and then into May, we had a lot of activities that were happening with transitioning youth and families and education, and Teresa and Jennifer will talk more about that. But that's gonna, right now, what we're doing with the office is doing some strategic planning activities to really look at where we need to focus our energy in the next fiscal year and then beyond. And transitioning youth families is a key area, and as Bob said, is so important to really having that culture shift and creating that change and expectation about work. So we invite you, if you're a family member or an individual seeking services, or if you want to partner with us in that, we invite you to outreach to Teresa. Nguyen would be your contact for that. Next slide, please. And this is our team, our really happy, excited, passionate bunch of curriculum developer trainers and business services professional and grant writer, program evaluator. And if you haven't met them in person, hopefully down the road we'll have an opportunity to do that, but they're all going to be presenting to you today. Next slide. And contact information, we just wanted to make sure you had this available to you so you could outreach directly based on the topic presented. Next slide. And again, this is our website, just to share with you again, and our phone number as well, and email address, which will get you directly to one of our team members so we can engage with you further. Next slide. All right, so that ends my time with you. And we're going to transition into benefits counseling. And Melanie Hansbrook is the curriculum developer trainer for the Office of Employment First. And she specializes in benefits counseling and has been, I can't remember the number of years, Melanie, but she's been doing this work for an extensive period of time. And I don't think I've met anyone more passionate about benefits planning, counseling than Melanie. And we're so grateful to have her on our team. And so I'm going to turn it over to you now, Melanie. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Patricia. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for your time this morning. We're leading off with a great topic here about the office. I'm definitely partial, as Patricia noted, but benefits counseling, it's been mentioned by Bob, it's been mentioned by Patricia. Really, it's out there, and people may or may not have heard of it, may or may not know exactly what it means. And so we'll start with some of the basics. Next slide, please. So what is it? Benefits counseling, you heard Patricia call it benefits planning. Those two words can really be interchanged. So regardless of what you call it, it's a service that really helps individuals with disabilities, their families, their support systems, really understand how different life decisions like going to work or getting an education can really impact their benefit scenario. And a benefit scenario is just what benefits they're on. And benefits are things like the two big ones that most people know are SSI and SSDI. SSDI is Social Security Disability Insurance, and SSI is Supplemental Security Income. And those are the two big ones, but there's lots of other benefits that can fit into someone's scenario. For example, SNAP, food stamp benefits, Medicare. In Colorado, we have all different kinds of doorways into the Medicaid program. And I could really go on and on with that list. But any one person would have their own benefit scenario, and benefit counseling addresses that. So next slide, please. All right. So what the unique part about benefits counseling is it really provides a clear, personalized plan for an individual when they're looking at those goals like employment. The name of that clear, personalized plan is Benefit Summary and Analysis, or BSA. And you don't have to walk away from the presentation day and remember that term. But you can say you've heard of it when it pops up later. But the benefit summary analysis is that clear, personalized plan, and it's a report that takes that unique benefit scenario that a person has, and it helps to map out how their work goal, or maybe their current work, or maybe their goal to go into education and then work, how that all fits into their benefit scenario. It helps explain how that affects their full financial situation, not just the one or two benefits. And maybe even the most important part is that it lets that person and the support system know all of the work incentive or work support programs that really enhance that person's earning ability. And if you haven't heard, we really have a lot of severely underutilized work incentive programs out there. And it's really about people not knowing that they're there. Doing all of that, putting that all into the report, into the plan, and letting people know that information really helps them address their fears and concerns that they have about having a reduction or a loss of benefits if they work or if they make those different life decisions. Anybody that goes through the application process for Social Security benefits especially, it's really almost hammered into a person's head about what they can't do. And so, and that they can't work. And so really it's about changing, benefits counseling is about changing that mindset and letting them know that they can work regardless of the benefit. And the other thing that benefits counseling does in this clear, personalized plan is it really provides individuals and their families that opportunity for informed choice. And that's what we want for everybody, regardless of disability or not. Everybody should have informed choice in what they're doing with their employment goals. Next slide. So why benefits counseling? Benefits are often, a huge percentage of the time, they are the economic stability for a person. And that, of course, is also tied to mental and physical well-being. Programs like those two big ones, SSI and SSDI, provide income for basic needs, food, clothing, shelter, and they often provide access to health insurance. And health insurance for any of us is huge. Other programs like Medicaid waivers, that health coverage, any other benefits, really provide the services and benefits that promote individuals living in their communities integrated. And that's what everybody should have that opportunity to do. That being said, next slide, please. Because work, that's why benefits counseling. Work, whether it's paid or unpaid, is good for our health and well-being. It contributes to our happiness, confidence, self-esteem, and a bank account. That's why we all work, I assume, most of us. I do. I work for all of those. Employment is a social determinant of health. That's what the studies show. And people in work tend to enjoy happier, healthier lives than those who are not working. And just because a person is receiving a benefit or a combination of benefits, that shouldn't restrict them from being able to make work choices so they can experience those things as well. So every person should have that opportunity to pursue work and then ultimately better financial position. Next slide, please. And then the studies behind benefits counseling is studies show that job seekers who receive benefits counseling achieve employment in greater numbers. They get it more quickly, and they have significant improvements in earnings. That, of course, in turn has a positive effect on employment outcomes. They're going to seek employment services less if they pick a career versus a job. Someone might not just go get a job to pay the next bill. They actually might choose a career and a career that they enjoy and that they're passionate about. That, of course, reduces their dependence on benefits, which has overall savings for the Social Security Administration, if it's those federal benefits, or other local funds that fund those other benefit programs. Next slide. So when should a person get benefits counseling? Really, anytime employment is part of the conversation, then benefits counseling should be a part of that conversation as well. And really, that's to keep that informed choice. And it's also to make sure that a person knows that they have a team behind them. They have an employment specialist, they have a case manager, maybe they have a benefits counselor. So if something scary comes from Social Security or DHS, Department of Human Services, or another program, then they know they have someone to go to help them through that situation. I tell this story all the time because it's one of my most memorable from providing services, or benefits counseling services in Colorado. I had an individual come in and hand me a letter, completely hysterical, in tears. And it was a letter from Social Security telling them to basically to write a check for $75,000 because they'd been overpaid. And I would have panicked too. And benefits counseling can be a way, first of all, maybe to avoid a letter like that, or it can be a way to address and figure out what's going on and if there's a way to get some of that $75,000 addressed. So that's an example of when to, well, hopefully pursue benefits counseling before that, but benefits counseling can be a key piece to those scary moments as well. Anytime employment is being considered can include prior to seeking employment or education. Like I said, anytime employment's in the conversation, benefits counseling should be looked at as well. If someone's in the job search, we want them to be aware going in so they can make an informed choice on what types of jobs and earnings they're looking for. When they're working with the Division of Voc Rehab, that's important. Voc Rehab, you'll hear from them in a little while, but they have benefits counseling on their fee schedule. If a person obtains employment, they should either revisit or visit a benefits counselor as well to make sure they have an understanding of how that work's going to affect their benefits and what they need to do about reporting that work and things like that, what's to come. And then if someone's currently working and if changes occur while they're working, it's important to keep the benefits counselor involved so they know how those changes affect. And then a specific kind of population that we have on here is transition age students. There's a lot that happens, especially around age 18 with Social Security. And so transition age students, as they're transitioning away from regular school into further education or work, that's important to pursue benefits counseling as well. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So what is the Colorado Office of Employment First doing around benefits counseling, or working to do? So we're working to increase the knowledge base. That's one of the main things. When I first started, I was with DVR prior to this, but when I first started kind of exploring benefits counseling in our state and where we were at, I really learned that there was a lot of people that didn't have a true understanding of what benefits counseling is and what to expect. And so one of the first things that we're addressing through the office is to increase that knowledge base around benefits counseling. And that's the what, the when, the why, the how of the service. People often understand that it's an important thing to know how work affects benefits and that type of information. And they also understand that it's a super scary topic with so much uncertainty around it. What's true out there and what isn't. And so that's one of the first things that we're working to increase is that knowledge base around all of those things. And it's important to get people and their families to a certified benefits counseling service provider to be able to make sure that their decisions are truly informed. We're working to increase resources as well. And this is increasing accessible information, easily understood resources, If you have ever read a Social Security document, it's usually not terribly user-friendly. There's a lot of hidden meaning in some of their stuff. And that applies to other benefits as well. It's hard to find information. So we're working on increasing resources in our state, not only for people with disabilities and within our communities. We're looking at increasing resources to support those that are providing the service as well. And so they have the information that they need to be able to provide that expected service. The next thing we're looking at is increasing capacity. Right now, our state doesn't quite have enough certified benefits counselors to provide the service. So we're working to increase that capacity, which ultimately would support those that provide the service as well to provide the best service. Because as I alluded to before, the most effective benefits counseling services happen when those clear and personalized plans are happening. So it will help that as well. And then the last thing that we're looking at right now is to increase access across Colorado to benefits counseling. And we're working to increase access to the communities and areas especially that have more limited access to service providers of benefits counseling. And part of that is including, first, educating these communities, these areas about, again, what the service is, the who, what, the when, the why, the how, and then how benefits counselors can truly support that informed choice on employment, and then ultimately community integration as well. And this all goes back to all of these 4 bullets that you see here on the slide, all goes back to the idea of work as a social determinant of happiness, and then increased bank accounts. Next slide, please. So how are we influencing benefits counseling right now? Patricia mentioned it before, but I'm super excited to say that we are, the Colorado Office of Employment First through University of Colorado is officially under contract to get a benefits calculator for our state. The benefits calculator is an online web platform, and it's a calculator. And so someone can have 24/7, 365 days a year opportunity to go in and explore the world of work and benefits. You can go in and plug in numbers and your benefit situation and see how that all mixes together. The name of the calculator will be DB101. We have an estimated public rollout in August of next year, August of 2021. And with DB101, I do have the a generic website there. You actually can go to that website and explore the other states that have the web calculators. There's 9 other states. Colorado will be the 10th. And so if you want to see what some of the other states have for their calculators, it'll give you an idea of what Colorado will have as well. The online calculator will, in Colorado, will be main calculators that cover SSI and SSDI. And then Colorado will also have one specific to our Medicaid buy-in program. So that's super exciting as well. We will also have a Spanish version. And then when someone accesses all these calculators, there can be complete anonymity when going in. So someone doesn't have to go in and feel like, oh, if I put my numbers in, Social Security or Department of Human Services is going to find out and they're going to affect my benefits. Because there's definitely fear out there around that. But this will be a way to not have to worry about that. And then lastly, this calculator is a way for people to prep for and explore work virtually. And we know during this time of COVID, of unemployment, with stay at home and safer at home, these virtual tools will be quite a key in still keeping work on the forefront. And I know we don't have it now, but we will have it, like I said, in August of 2021. The next thing that, with the rollout of the benefits calculator, you can look for statewide promotional and educational trainings. We'll be training anyone and everyone on what it is, how to use it, how to make it beneficial for you or the people that you serve. And so those will be coming out as well. So that's something to be excited for as well. And then with the benefits collaborative, that's actually, I have here, it's a bi-monthly group. Lately, we've been meeting monthly, but It's all of the certified benefits counselors in our state. And we're meeting for an hour each month, or each month that we meet, to give each other, to be able to provide each other technical assistance, which is huge, especially if you're a new benefits counselor and you're the only one in your agency. They have the opportunity to give input on how we're shaping benefits counseling in Colorado. After all, these service providers are the ones out on the ground providing excellent service. We have conversations about service provision, how that's working with DVR, how that's working with any other agencies. And then it's an also opportunity to discuss partnership opportunities as well. Next slide, please. So what we're doing right now, how do we continue to, as an office, to influence benefits counseling? We're providing trainings. I've mentioned that already. The what, the why, the when, the how, the work effects on benefits. Those trainings will morph as we increase that knowledge base into different details and other topics around benefits. We're doing statewide trainings and webinars. Those are to individuals and families, service providers, community organizations. For example, we just did a webinar through the Office of Employment First, sponsored webinars around COVID-19. And we did a bunch of quick guides in partnership with a few different agencies related to how the changes in COVID-19 were affecting benefits. So that's one example. We're also having, we also have partnerships with our state partners like DVR and other partnerships outside of our state agencies like Colorado APSI. Those are just two of many. And it's all about improving access and the quality of benefits counseling services in Colorado and really getting the word out there. And then resource tools, we'll be working on those. I mentioned that earlier. What's out there now? How do we make that better, more accessible? And then what's needed? How do we fill those gaps? Next slide, please. And this is one tool that the Colorado APSI Benefits Counseling Subcommittee, of which I'm a part, worked on, and it's a benefits counseling guide. You'll be getting that with part of your tools today, and it's also at this website that you can see on the slide here. And it identifies the who, what, the when, the how, and it identifies all the certified benefits counselors in Colorado that are specific to the vendors that are on the fee schedule for voc rehab. So with that, I am going to end my talk about benefits counseling, and I'm going to transition to my colleague, Brian Dean. Thanks, everybody.
Perfect. Thanks, Melanie, and good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Dean. I'm the Customized Employment Program Developer and Trainer for the Colorado Office of Employment First. I first wanted to say thanks to Bob Lawhead for the introduction and kind of laying some of that groundwork for customized employment, and especially for sharing Jess's story with those pictures. Those were great. So thanks Bob, for doing that. Next slide, please. So just another quick overview of how customized employment began and where it started. And Bob mentioned this as well. It really started in 2014 when it was signed into the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act, also known as WIOA. And the focus of WIOA was to really increase individuals with disabilities, their access to high quality workforce services that would prepare them for competitive integrated employment. And to do this is where they specifically identified customized employment as a service delivery option for job seekers. And part of this as well, and it's an important thing to note, is that the Office of Disability Employment Policy, or ODEP, has evidence-informed research showing positive data and positive employment outcomes related to customized employment. And again, as just to briefly touch on Senate Bill 16077, making Colorado employment first state, as well, it really started to lay the groundwork for customized employment. Next slide, please. So what is customized employment? So it refers to competitive and integrated employment for individuals with significant disabilities. Where utilizing traditional job development or placement methods in the past weren't successful for that individual. And that really means, maybe they try to be placed in a job, or like Bob's example, answering the phone, not being able, Jess doesn't drive, so delivering pizzas, having him work, that's just not going to be a good fit or a good match. But doing something like folding pizza boxes really meets his needs, and that's something that he can do, and he likes to do that. And customized employment is really focused on the determination of strengths, needs, and interests of the job seeker, designing to meet their specific abilities as an individual. But the key component that's just as important as the individual piece is meeting that needs of that employer through flexible strategies and meeting an unmet business need. Customized employment, really, to break it down as simple, we're answering the question of, who is this person? Who are they? What do they like? What do they do? And how can we help those individuals doing what they want within a competitive position? Next slide, please. So customized employment is rooted in essential elements. And these essential elements were developed by the Workforce Innovation Technical Assistance Center and Youth Technical Assistance Center in partnership with subject matter experts in customized employment such as Mark Golden Associates, Griffin Hammis Associates, Virginia Commonwealth University, as well as Transcend, to really kind of identify the integrity and the fidelity and the complexity of customized employment. So I wanted to highlight a few of these elements that I think are very important. It is a 12-page document that was developed around this. The first one is competitive integrated employment outcomes. As we've mentioned and discussed throughout, competitive integrated employment, working alongside their peers, earning minimum wage or higher. The next one is a no-fail process that assumes everybody can work. And what this is really saying is that pursuing employment and going down that avenue is a positive experience, and it presumes that there's going to be a benefit for that individual, allowing them, that could be to learn and explore employment, learn things about themselves, what they like or don't like within work, and the opportunity to make self-directed decisions related to their interests in work. The next one is a key element is it's an in-depth person-centered approach. So as I mentioned earlier, is who is this person? And it's really focusing on getting to know them and not any form of evaluation or comparative assessment. It's really looking at that person and letting them be the driver of their services, their interests, their jobs. And even, an example of taking that a step further, if that individual has difficulties communicating or understanding or processing, part of this approach is they can identify a spokesperson, but everything still gets rooted through that job seeker of, yes, if this is what they're interested in, or no, and then have their spokesperson kind of help further facilitate any of that communication, which is key. And then the last one, and this is focused on the job development aspect of customized employment, is it focuses on job tasks rather than job titles. So we're not looking to place an individual doing something within your standard position description, but really identifying those tasks, what they like to do, what they're interested in doing, and going from there. And essentially also to meet any unmet business tasks that aren't getting completed for an employer, or someone just doesn't really have the time to devote as much effort to that task. Next slide, please. All right. So these are the three phases of customized employment. We'll walk through these and I'll give some examples of each area. So the first one is discovery. Again, getting to know that person. And discovery is a little different. It's all done at the beginning or done at the forefront. So really, again, looking at that person's interests, their strengths, what are they motivated to do? What do they need to be successful towards their employment goals and aspirations? Discovery is, like I said earlier, it's not a comparative method. It's not a standardized assessment. There's no evaluations. It's simply focused on observations and describing or being descriptive of those observations into a document. So here are some examples of what the discovery process could look like for an individual. It involves a home visit. You know, what does that home look like for that individual? How is their room? Is it extremely organized and color coordinated, or is it a little bit more of a mess and kind of chaotic? And what information can we learn from that? It involves participating in activities in the community with that individual of their choice. So if you're working with someone and they're a huge hockey fan, they want to go to a hockey game, you go to a hockey game with this individual and just watch and observe. Do they know where their seat is? Do they go and get, you know, a hot dog? You know, what are their interactions like? Another aspect or activity with discovery is participating in a novel activity, something that individual wants to do but they've never done before. And then another activity involved with discovery is surveying or looking at that job seeker's neighborhood. Where do they live? Are they near a bus line? Are there a lot of small businesses around, or do they live by a larger shopping center that could have some opportunities? Are there neighbors out front? Are there people outside interacting? And really looking at that information and seeing what can we learn from this to then support this individual with work. And I'll give an example here in a story at the end that really provides great information to the employment specialist working with this job seeker as part of discovery. The next one is aspect is customized job development. And this is really focused on one job for one individual. Again, job tasks versus job positions and on job negotiation. So job negotiating is really focused on negotiating the needs, the strengths, and the interests of that job seeker that were identified through the discovery process, but also negotiating and with that business and that employer for needs that could be met. So an example of job negotiation for an individual could be, let's say an individual has a standing appointment every day from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Let's say, we'll go with the everyday thing. So working with that employer, I can say, you know, my job seeker, they can be here, they can work every day, they can be here from 1 to close, whatever you need. You know, that's negotiating that schedule based on availability and not focusing on saying, well, they've got this standing a meeting, it's going to kind of cause some conflict. So really negotiating and offering things to that employer. The third piece here that I have listed is systematic instruction, and this is a form of enhanced job coaching. Systematic instruction is kind of a bonus component that here in Colorado we're looking to add and implement within our customized employment program. And it really focuses on utilizing strategies to teach learners job tasks with the goal of fading out of those job coaching services. Ultimately, as independent as possible, completing those tasks with any supports or supervision as needed. All right, next slide, please. So what are the benefits of customized employment? Well, it's a cross disability focus. It does and can work with individuals with the most significant disabilities or barriers to employment, and to serve individuals who haven't traditionally seen success in looking for work. But it also can be used for individuals with brain injury or individuals without a disability. The discovery process can really be utilized for anybody, because it really helps getting to know that person and figuring out what they're interested in and what they want to do. Customized employment, again, it identifies employment possibilities and tasks that the job seeker is interested in doing, that they're motivated to do. And motivation is key, and it makes it fun and engaging to go to work and do these things. There's a level of excitement. And customized employment is backed by an evidence-informed practices demonstrating positive employment outcomes for individuals with significant disabilities. There's still a lot of research being done, but the results have shown that the outcomes have been very positive. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to give a quick overview of where we're at capacity-wise and the future we're looking to go. So currently there's 10 employment specialists who are certified in discovery services to provide customized employment services, either in discovery, customized job development, or systematic instruction. An individual has to have completed a performance-based training, demonstrating that they've attended the training, but then their use and practice of those services as well. So there's 10 individuals certified currently in discovery services. There's 6 employment specialists who are certified in job development. And we currently will have 8 employment specialists who will be obtaining certification in systematic instruction. Systematic instruction is a very hands-on, hand-over-hand process, and due to COVID-19 and safer at home and stay-at-home orders, that's kind of been a little bit delayed, but we'll have people working through that as well. So the future capacity, we're currently doing in collaboration with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, 2 trainings per each phase. So we had a discovery training in May, which we had about 36 attendees, and 21 of those individuals will be moving forward in certification and discovery, which is really great, throughout the state, from as south as Pueblo all the way up to the Greeley-Fort Collins area as well. We have another discovery services training scheduled for the end of June. That is currently full, and we're anticipating another 20 to 25 individuals becoming certified in discovery services. August will be a very busy month of training. We're conducting 2 customized job development trainings within about 3 weeks of each other. Again, looking to get certified anywhere from 20 to 25 people per training cohort in customized job development. And then again, in systematic instruction, there will be a training in the middle of October and then that first week of December for systematic instruction and getting people certified there as well. And next slide, please. And the future, always looking at the future and being innovative and how can we work with customized employment and capacity building as well as sustainability. Well, we're going to develop a customized employment curriculum that's specific to Colorado, where that training can be done within the state and we don't have to partner with a training entity to do that. Looking to build a Colorado customized employment training team, building a Colorado mentoring network as well to mentor employment specialists, counselors with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, case managers with local community center boards, really tailoring and training on the service delivery side of it, but as well as individuals more on the administrative role as well. And we're currently conducting learning communities for our service providers who are certified in each area of customized employment, and those are facilitated by the employment specialist. So they run their group and they talk through what worked, what didn't work, and staff any cases or anything that has come up. And next slide, please. All right, so this is a quick story, and this is kind of Margaret Sanderson, and she's an employment specialist who works in the Alamosa area. So Margaret began with this process during the pilot in kind of the beginning of late 2018, beginning of 2019. She's a job developer in the Alamosa area. And she's a former higher education professional, and she's really decided after education she wanted to start working with individuals with disabilities and support them towards their goals. So Margaret started being a vendor in 2014 with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, and really started working with individuals and heard of the opportunity for customized employment and really wanted to expand her knowledge to better support the individuals that she's working with. So what Margaret had said about customized employment, that it's opened up a lot of new avenues and approaches for her. She really got to learn and sharpen her skills through customized employment and support her job seeker. And really, she just loves the process. She's calls all the time telling about how excited she was and all the different things that her learning partner's done. So as part of the process, Margaret met with her learning partner's track coach, and I'm going to read a quote that the coach provided to Margaret. "He would give you everything," said his high school track coach, Becky. "I only needed to show him a couple of times how to do something, and he would then complete the task on his own. After he learned how to set up his own blocks, he would help younger runners set up theirs. That kid is a hard worker, and he will do the best of his ability, whatever you give him," she said. So I think that's a really great quote and extremely valuable and useful information that you may not get just doing traditional job development or filling out applications after application as well. So Margaret did job development with her job seeker as well, and I'm very excited to share that he recently started his position doing maintenance and lawn care. It was a little bit of a delay due to COVID-19, but he has now started, and if that job didn't work out due to the job development and Margaret's ability to negotiate, she actually had 3 jobs lined up for him that he was all interested in and got to pick the job that he wanted to do. All right. And at that, I'm going to transition over to my teammate, Deirdre Sage, and let her talk about her section.
Hi everyone, this is Deirdre. I can't for some reason start my video, but we're going to actually take a 5-minute break before we talk about IPS. So take 5 and we'll be back at 10:30. Hi everybody, it's Deirdre Sage from the Colorado Office of Employment First. We are coming back from a break and I'm going to launch into IPS, Individual Placement and Support, which is a evidence-based practice for supported employment. Next slide. So I started doing supported employment about 14 years ago. And when I started, we weren't doing IPS. And I could definitely see the difference. in using an evidence-based practice versus using some other employment practices and supported employment practices to help individuals on my caseload. So we implemented IPS in my program in 2014, or excuse me, yes, 2014. And what we saw was by having an evidence-based practice to follow, a fidelity scale to follow, and practice principles really helped us understand the path we were taking to help people find jobs. And so individual placement and support is an evidence-based practice. It's extensively researched, and it's the most effective practice for assisting people with mental illness access competitive and integrated employment. The practice is rooted in 8 practice principles and is supported by a 25-item fidelity scale. That fidelity scale is a tool used by reviewers and trainers to measure the level of IPS implementation in a program. It highlights the most important components of the model in order to determine if a program is fully implementing the model. And when a program is fully implementing IPS supported employment, we will find really good outcomes, including job placement for individuals who are seeking our services. What I really enjoy about IPS and what I found to be the most helpful as a practitioner is we were really integrating the support of a team of clinical professionals and family members. But most importantly, we were looking at the preferences of that job seeker. So speaking to what Brian said about customized employment is really looking at the individual and what were their needs, their hopes, their goals, their dreams in employment. Next slide, please. So IPS works, and it works because we have researched it since the 90s. There's been 27 randomized control trials for IPS. In those trials, it showed that IPS programs, the competitive rate of employment for IPS programs is 56% compared to the rate of 23% for control groups. In 4 of those studies, it demonstrated that IPS is 3 times as likely to achieve employment, where job seekers work more hours, and people receiving IPS services worked at 4 times as many hours compared to controls. Some research shows that IPS participants use less mental health services and fewer hospitalizations. Next slide. So we want to focus on those IPS practice principles that I mentioned earlier. These are the principles that really guide IPS programs and employment specialists. So there's a focus on competitive employment. So individuals are not, so real jobs and real wages in typical community-based work settings is the goal of IPS. It is the outcome, and it's considered a short-term outcome. So we are really trying to help people engage in employment very quickly. Individuals are not excluded. So the second practice principle is eligibility is based on client choice or zero exclusion. So individuals are not excluded from IPS based on disability symptoms, criminal justice history, hospitalization history, substance abuse, etc. The most important factor is that a person wants to work. And evidence actually shows that clinicians are not great predictors of who will be successful in employment. And so we want people to promote employment as an option for everybody, and for IPS to accept everybody and provide those services, because we will see good outcomes that way. Number 3, integrating of rehabilitation and mental health services. So employment specialists work with integrated teams that include case managers, doctors, therapists, peer supports, and others, including DVR. IPS programs have a very close connection to the Division of Vocational Rehab. For attention to worker preferences, this is a person-centered, job seeker-led approach, as the job seeker's strengths, skills, support needs, preferences, formulate all the strategy behind behind job seeking, job development, placement, and support phases. Individualization is key. Personalized benefits counseling. All job seekers in IPS are offered the opportunity to work with a trained benefits counselor. Melanie did an excellent job of highlighting why that is such a crucial service in supported employment and our employment first initiatives. Number 6, rapid job search. So this is rapid job search, not rapid job placement, but the job search starts within 30 days of the first meeting with a job seeker. The idea behind this is that we want to continue with the motivation and the inspiration to access employment, and that if we put job seekers through lengthy assessment or evaluations or transitional jobs, they're less likely to be employed. So we believe that accessing that job search as quickly as possible within 30 days of the initial appointment is the best way to find employment. So 7, systematic job development. Job development is targeted to match the preferences of the job seeker. Employment specialists build relationships with employers by learning what matters to the employer and assisting and assessing for the best match on the job match with the job seeker's preferences. And then finally, the 8th practice principle is time unlimited and individualized support. So we are individualizing all phases of IPS supported employment, and those phases can happen at different times for each individual. But the important thing is that we are going to stick with an employee or job seeker as long as they wish to stay with us. And we're going to really think about integrating all those people I talked about on that integrated team and being part of what it looks like to transition successfully off of IPS services. Next slide, please. So kind of bring it back to, who is implementing IPS and where. We have those 27 randomized control trials that prove the effectiveness of IPS. IPS is being implemented in 24 states, 6 countries. There are 12 programs in Colorado that are implementing IPS and are part of the IPS learning community. We have 4 IPS expansion programs, and we have a 49, as of 2019, we had a 49% placement rate, or percent of clients, of IPS clients working. We learned just yesterday that the last quarter we had a 53% placement rate for IPS programs, which is outstanding. Next slide, please. So this is IPS placements versus Colorado versus national, and you'll see Colorado is in the blue, and we look at 2015 to up to last year. So Colorado is actually above the national rate, and we're just below 50% average on a yearly basis. So that's really exciting. And the next slide, please. Now I wanted to show this chart because in 2015, when a lot of programs started taking off in IPS, we had 376 clients working. And then we fast forward to last year, IPS programs had 1,749 individuals working. And you can see this is kind of another way to look at individuals working versus individuals served. And it's really exciting to me because I again remember in 2015 when we were first implementing IPS at my program and how it took off. And we just became more and more successful, engaged more and more of our job seekers in the process. Next slide. So here some of the service providers I talked about, those 12 mental health centers, community mental health centers currently implementing IPS, and then some of the expansion sites, Easter Seals, Jefferson County, TANF, and empowerment. I wanted to show that because they are all over the state of Colorado, not just in the Denver metro area. And it's a really exciting thing that we can have job seekers access these services throughout the state. Next slide, please. IPS is also expanding beyond mental health populations, behavioral health populations, into intellectual and developmental disabilities, autism spectrum disorder, substance use disorder, spinal cord injury, traumatic brain injury, criminal justice, TANF, and transition age youth. We'll show some of the studies in the next slide, please. In 9 studies with IPS in new populations, IPS demonstrated a higher rate of competitive employment than in control groups in all of the studies. An Illinois statewide study yielded a 36% competitive employment rate for youth with developmental or psychiatric disability enrolled in IPS services. And a study conducted with veterans with PTSD showed a 76% rate of employment compared to a 28% rate of employment for the control groups. And the participants also reported more earnings and sustained employment longer than those in control groups. So we're showing that IPS can really, it is a very, when you break down the model and you look at the fidelity and the things that we're following in IPS, what we're really doing is a supported employment program that is so individualized that it is showing promise in being expanded beyond the initial population it was designed for. And of course, our program, our Easter Seals program, our TANF program, and our empowerment program are demonstrating that currently. Next slide, please. So Colorado Office of Employment First and IPS priorities. So IPS employment specialist training, we kicked this off in March. And then COVID happened and we adapted and we developed the rest of our training to be delivered online. And so we were successful. We were able to graduate 22 employment specialists from that training who were able to train to the core competencies highlighted in Senate Bill 18145 and to learn IPS fidelity practice. We also are underway with our second cohort, which is training just a little over 30 participants currently, and we're expected to graduate that cohort in 2 weeks. In our trainings, we really do emphasize the fidelity. We also emphasize individualized career assessment, job support, planning, and job development. And we highlight that, of course, IPS is a person-centered, job seeker-led activity and intervention for supported employment. We are also launching IPS learning and practice communities, which are our culmination of our expertise in our Colorado leadership team, which are members from our Division of Vocational Rehab and our community partners that are providing IPS, such as Easter Seals, and of course our Office of Behavioral Health. So that those learning and practice communities will actually be IPS employment specialists, and the goal for those learning and practice communities are to share best practices, problem solve, and build community with IPS service providers. So an opportunity as an employment specialist to come together with other employment specialists on a monthly basis to really share and highlight what is working well and what maybe are needs that we will need to train to in the future. But most importantly, it's important to bring people together that are in this field because we want them to feel empowered and we want them to feel skilled and good at their jobs. And then IPS expansion for populations other than mental health. We want to continue the good work that our community providers are doing in Easter Seals and TANF and empowerment. and support programs that want to implement IPS through technical assistance and employment specialist training. And then implementation of good fidelity. When we have good fidelity, we have good outcomes. The better the fidelity, the higher the rate of employment. And so we're going to support the best practices to achieve good fidelity or higher in all programs. The next slide, please. I'd like to introduce Teresa Nguyen and Jennifer Stewart, who are going to be talking about youth, families, and self-advocates. Thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre, so much. Next slide, please. Good morning, everyone. As you know, I'm Teresa Nguyen, part of the Colorado Office of Employment First team, and my focus is on working with youth and families to help better expand the opportunities and the information about competitive integrative employment to the community, as of course that's the community that we're serving, and we want to get the best information out there for the folks. And so I'm confident that you all, being in the JFK network and being a part of CANDO, all understand how fragmented the processes of transitioning to adulthood can be for people with disabilities and their families. And this really includes the process of employment. These are some of the questions on the slide about what families and youth often wonder, right? Where and when can we talk about employment? Who is responsible for those conversations? And what resources and services are available? And so our Office of Employment First is focused on responding to these gaps, especially in employment for transition-aged youth and families. Next slide, please. To further demonstrate the gaps in employment for people with disabilities, I wanted to share some data taken from the American Community Survey that was collected in 2017. So on the left of the screen, the chart shows national data where, of course, only 18.8% of people with disabilities are employed compared to 66% of people without disabilities being employed nationally. On the right side, the data is broken down into state data, and so this is Colorado's data, again showing that the employment rate for people with disabilities stands at 30.9%, as opposed to 71.8% of an employment rate for people without disabilities. And so this just shows that we have a lot of work to do, and we're really excited to tackle some of that. Next slide, please. So to impact employment outcomes for individuals with disabilities, the Colorado Office of Employment First is focusing our work with youth and families in the systems of employment, healthcare, and education. In healthcare, we know that employment is a social determinant of health and can contribute to the overall health and wellness of an individual. And for people with disabilities, as they start planning and preparing to move into the adult healthcare system, we find that employment is not often incorporated into this process. And so with that, we are in the process of developing a physician toolkit to help guide the conversation around transition, with kind of employment being integrated into that conversation so that the systems are integrated. In the employment realm, we are working on strategies and resource development to communicate employment expectations and possibilities to youth and families. In doing this, some of our strategies are we are connecting with Colorado's Youth Leadership Forum, organized and hosted by the Colorado Statewide Independent Living Council. While the Leadership Forum is canceled for this summer of 2020, we are looking at partnering again with the SILC, or the Statewide Independent Living Council, on training and supporting the past alumni of this program, as I believe they have had 3 cohorts already with the Leadership Forum. And so that's really exciting to be able to increase expectations and access to employment for that community. Our awesome liaison for our office and the Department of Education hosted several listening sessions that she will discuss shortly. What we learned from that was that we really need a youth and young adult employment advisory council to really begin diving into what youth and young adults are facing in Colorado in regards to employment. And so again, this is in development with partnerships with the Centers for Independent Living around the state and other community partners as well. And lastly, we recognize that families are an integral part of the preparation process and path to employment for youth with disabilities. And so to best serve families, we're aiming to develop targeted resources and trainings for families to better understand their critical role in the employment path for their loved one. So I am going to be handing it over to Jennifer Stewart now to continue the conversation about youth and families.
Great, thanks Teresa. Good morning everyone, I'm Jennifer Stewart. I am a contractor with the Office of Employment First, really acting as a liaison around all sort of young adult and transition work. So working closely with the Department of Education as well as the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. And I'm going to talk about my work with CDE, as we would refer to the Department of Education. But first I thought I would start by just sort of giving more of sort of the passion and the context as to why transition is so important when we're talking about being an employment first state and having employment as an expectation. And so some of the key points are really, we're moving towards, we need to start this conversation younger, right? We don't want to wait until technically when transition services start in high school at age 15, right? We're not wanting to start at age 15. We're wanting to think about how are we really raising awareness and talking about employment in those younger years. And so it's really about influencing those expectations. And you know, the best predictor of post-school outcomes is both parental and teacher expectations. And I was actually talking to a parent yesterday and hearing her story. And it was very interesting how she would describe actually the teacher's expectations, or the doors that the teacher was describing for her son in terms of what the options were for sort of their transition years and after. As the mom would say, they were making his community smaller. And she wanted to make his community bigger and have employment be a part of that community. And the options that were being presented by the teachers were really having those lower expectations. And so it's really key and crucial. We think about the role that our educators play in the transition process. So we know, you know, at the office, we're really trying to work closely with CDE to say, how can we increase knowledge of our educators around, you know, the importance of understanding what is out there to have higher expectations. So another key point of just why transition is important is really thinking about the importance of a vision and doing person-centered planning. We're really moving more towards seeing more and more student-led IEP meetings and hearing that student voice. So this is a key point of transition. And also to that point is where that happens, that we need to not necessarily just have transition happening at an IEP meeting, but, you know, can we do more planning with families to really support that bigger picture thinking beyond just the school system and what they're able to do. So that another key point around transition is it's really a time of navigating these systems, because we have sort of the school system and family and what's happening in the community. We start talking about eligibilities for adult services. So it's a really overwhelming time. We know that there's lots of information out there, but we're really thinking through, you know, how best is that information provided and accessible. And so that's some of the work that we're doing at the office when we're thinking about transition. Next slide. I wanted to share, this is a transition planning tool, and I want to bring it to light because I love its simplicity. And this tool is called Charting the Life Course, and it's really about planning, right? So a vision for a good life. You have this trajectory, and how do we get there? But what I like most about this tool and what works well with young adults is what you don't want, right? So a lot of times it's like, well, what do you want to do for a job? I don't know. But what do you not want? Oh, okay, well, I don't want to live with my parents. I know that I don't want to have to take the bus. And so this tool, I think, is a nice way to start having that conversation. And I'm just sharing it because as we think about trying to move the dial to talking about this at a younger age, the simplicity of the tool is really going to be important. Next slide. Just quickly, I wanted to highlight sort of an inspiring story that I think really shows the power of transition, having a person-centered plan. As this young woman, Kiana Figures, started her own business, right? And so that really shows that she had a vision, and she also figured out what her strengths were. And so she really is tying together her passion for spreading awareness around Down syndrome, but she's utilizing her artwork and her research into, Down syndrome, and she created her own business where she's selling T-shirts. And this story also just shows that she was navigating the system. She reached out to the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation to support her in her vision. So I wanted to just bring that inspiring story to the conversation as we see the power of really being able to piece everything together. It's complicated, but congratulations to Kiana Figures for doing it. Next slide. So I want to highlight the work that I'm doing with the Department of Education. And when we came together, and I came on as a contractor, I suggested, let's start our work and let's develop an action plan by really hearing from the community. So we hosted 4 community listening sessions, and for getting stakeholder engagement. And while there were a lot of educators, we also had families and state systems, and so it was well represented in terms of everyone that attended. We probably had, over the course of these 4, and they were all virtual, listening sessions, we had about 140 attendees. So 140 people were listening or participated in giving us feedback as to really what are some of the gaps, in particular, during those transition age years. So not just focused on education, but what else, is happening during that time. So I'm going to talk about those results in just a second, but just a little bit out, sort of my work with the department is really to be focused on material development, right? So I'm working, we will release in mid-July our first round of brochures that are targeted for young adults and families, really promoting the importance of employment and how do you get there? How do you think about preparation? So I'm doing the development of materials and then really focused on collaborating among our systems. And I think that, the Office of Employment First is in such a unique role to really be sort of a convener of these agencies and supporting, aligning our communication. And I think that's one of the key things is aligning our communication. When we're talking about employment, let's all be, utilizing the same terms, thinking about awareness, preparation, exploration, how do we get students to employment? And so I'm excited to be really working with this team where we're trying to sequence some of these services. Next slide. Great, so I just have 2 slides sort of wanting to share some of the main themes that came out of the listening sessions. As I said, there was 4, there was a lot of information to analyze, but one of the key things, and I just spoke to that, is just the importance of expectations, but we really heard that from our families and from our educators, right? So it's not the expectation that they're just on this track and they're going to be going to day have, but how does employment get into their plan and how does it get into their goals early on? So the theme of expectations was very strong, and we're excited to be, already taking action and working on this. Another theme was really that we need more capacity around the knowledge and expertise of transition. So the transition planning process, employment, right? So what is work-based learning and how do you do it? How do you work with employers? but also in terms of transition, there was a lack of knowledge of what's life look like on the other side, and how do you incorporate, planning for a student's future and putting that into their IEP goals, right? So connecting all of the dots. So there's lots of work that we know that we can think about. How do we build that capacity of our educators to have more knowledge about transition? Oops, some of the slides are moving. All right, sorry, another theme was just the complexity of the system, right? And how do you coordinate everything? And that often leads to these gaps in how are we actually tracking that a student is making progress and they're building skills that are going to lead to employment. So that was another theme. The next slide, just sort of some of our action plans for moving forward. So Teresa already mentioned this, but one of the things that we really did here is just the need for more role models in our community and really hearing those stories. And so we really thought, we need to get young adults on board. And so we're starting to have some conversations with partners around, what would a young adult employment advisory board look like? Or how could we think about promoting other opportunities for youth leadership? So that is something that we're excited to be moving forward with. Another thing that with the Department of Education, they are having their summer institute with transition teams right now. So, but with these transition teams that have just sort of kicked off through a conference this morning, we're going to be doing ongoing work. I'm going to be supporting, facilitating some learning communities with these transition teams to not only build capacity around transition expertise, right? So we would be providing them information, but also to have shared learning among transition teams throughout the state, because there are some teams that are doing great things in school districts that have really learned how to pull into the community and partner with DVR and partner with their independent living center. So we're excited to create a learning community for some shared best practice. And then lastly, as I just mentioned, product development, and this is going to be ongoing as we really think about how do we influence expectations of both, for families, right? So family-friendly brochures, and then we'll have to dive in more to, really what's going to work for the school systems to get that education in there as well. So that's it for me. I'm going to say next slide and pass it on to Erin. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. My name is Erin Taylor. I'm with the Colorado Office of Employment First as the grant writer, program evaluator, and analyst. So I will be talking a little bit about evaluation and sustainability. That's internal evaluation within our office, external evaluation of our state agency partners, and then how we keep all of this really hard work going through sustainability efforts. So next slide, please. Excellent. So as Bob spoke about at the beginning of the presentation, the Employment First Advisory Partnership was incredibly successful in their efforts and put forward strategic recommendations. These recommendations were related to the implementation of Employment First and really trying to move things forward in Colorado over the coming years. And so those were from 2017, but we continue to evaluate those strategic recommendations today. And the Colorado Office of Employment First is fortunate that we can work with our state agency partners to evaluate how they're doing with Employment First. And I definitely have to use this time to recognize all of these agencies for continuing this hard work during COVID. Obviously, a lot of things have changed for all of us, but they have really been resilient and have adapted, and our work has really just continued with them in such a meaningful way so that we can continue to all focus on the individuals with disabilities that we serve. So we're having meetings currently about those strategic recommendations and seeing where they're at. There may be some level setting with our new COVID realities, but the core principles that are in those strategic recommendations remain, and we're really excited to see things moving forward in Colorado related to Employment First. Another part of my role is our internal program evaluation. You heard from our amazing curriculum developers and trainers about how quickly they have gotten trainings off the ground, how many individuals they've been impacting with those trainings. And so it's really important that our office is also meeting the expectations. And so I also do our internal program evaluation to help determine how we're doing meeting our goals. This third bullet point here, reviewing policies and rate structures, is an important one. At the last CANDO meeting that I attended in January, rate structures for providers was talked about, and it's not a coincidence that occurred. It really matters, the rates and policies that our hardworking service providers receive. And so a charge that came out of the strategic recommendations and that the Colorado Office of Employment First is moving forward with is doing a comprehensive rate structure and rate methodology project and evaluating the current structure, and we're working with a national leader to do that, and we'll hear more about that in a coming slide. My title has 3 parts, but one of it is analyst, and that relates to the data from state agencies. So we really want to have this qualitative or quantitative outcome for how things are moving forward in the state. And this has been one of the more challenging pieces of my role because each state agency collects data differently, and it's really important that we bring all of that data together and get a complete and comprehensive picture. And it's just incredible how Colorado's been able to work with all of these different state partners in order to collect that data and demonstrate success. And lastly, Bob also mentioned that this isn't just going to be a couple years of focusing on employment first and then we move on. This is going to be an effort that has to be sustained, and employment for people with disabilities is more important than ever with COVID. We know that in past recessions and other times of economic downturn, people with disabilities are unfortunately disproportionately affected. And so our work is, I really believe, more important than ever and has to be sustained. So we're looking at a variety of structures to do that. And as Patricia also mentioned, we have that favorable process within vocational rehabilitation where we can leverage federal funds. So we are looking for additional state funding as well as federal funds to help with our sustainability. Next slide, please. Okay, so I mentioned that data that we're analyzing and trying to work with all of our partners. That's because in our budget appropriation, some targeted data points were established in order to demonstrate progress in different areas. So what we are collecting and analyzing and putting forward is data related to these 6 targeted data points. Now, the Colorado Office of Employment First can only directly influence a few of these. This really is a collaborative effort across the state and state agencies and systems in order to move the needle on these. So you can see them here, but the big ones: increased number of individuals working in competitive integrated employment, decreased number of individuals working in sub-minimum wage employment, decreased number of individuals working in non-integrated employment settings, increased number of skilled and competent staff that are knowledgeable about employment first principles and practices. This is one that we're working very hard on within the Colorado Office of Employment First through training, as well as number 5, increased number of partners, families, and other stakeholders trained in areas of supported employment and benefits planning. I've been monitoring the chat and I can see that these 2 topics, they always have a lot of interest, and today's no exception. So we're really proud of the work that we're doing to increase the number of training and access to information about supported employment and benefits planning. And then lastly, increased number of new contracts implementing IPS, that individual placement and support, in new disability populations such as IDED and TBI or other co-occurring disorders. Next slide, please. Okay, and then just to wrap things up, I had mentioned that rate methodology and rate structure project. So since the Employment First Advisory Partnership strategic recommendations included that an examination of provider rates was necessary in Colorado, we have partnered with a national leader in rate methodology and structuring. He's worked successfully in other states, and we're really excited to have him on board with us to look at this very important topic. So he's working with providers, with the state agencies, with our office, and his overall goal is really to ensure that at the end of that project year, when he has analyzed the current environment, when he has looked at the current fee structure, when he's done a time study to see where time is spent, that there's a sustainable and sound rate methodology and structure that can be adopted in Colorado to both benefit providers, agencies, and then obviously the individuals that they all serve. And so this is a lengthy project. It'll end in December of this year, but it's really important work. And we're really excited to keep everyone posted on the progress of that. So that is my work with the Colorado Office of Employment First. I'm gonna go to the next slide and turn it over to Patricia Hankey again to discuss all these important state agencies that I mentioned in my presentation.
Great, thanks, Erin, and thanks to the Colorado Office of Employment First team on sharing all of that information, and thanks to those of you that are hanging in there with us. We appreciate this is a pretty long meeting and lots of information, but hopefully you're finding it helpful and keep putting your questions in the chat box. We appreciate that. So I wanted to do this transition slide to our hearing from our state agencies. I think you've kind of heard a theme throughout the presentation that effective partnerships and partnering is critical to the success of all of this and this movement within our state. And the individuals you're going to hear from are, have been representatives on the Employment First Advisory Partnership and the Advisory Committee for the Office of Employment First, and that we partner with very closely. And pre-COVID, when we were all working in offices, we were often in each other's offices all the time and collaborating. And so now we're doing it remotely, but still moving forward with the initiative. So first off is Adam Tucker, our colleague at Healthcare Policy and Financing, who has been such a strong advocate for Employment First in Colorado and support employment and inclusion. And it's been my pleasure to work with him over the past few years on these initiatives. And when I was with DVR, between DVR and HICPUF partnering. And so I'm going to stop talking because we want to give everybody ample time and then get to questions. But just wanted to let you all know and just say thank you to our state agency representatives for being here and for the continued partnership. Next slide, and Adam, you can take it from here. Are you with us, Adam?
Hey guys, can you hear me? There I am.
Yes, now we can hear you.
Literally as Patricia was handing it over to me, my phone hung up. So I do apologize about that. And I also apologize that I'm not on video because my Zoom is not letting me turn on my video. So you guys are stuck just listening to my name. So I apologize about that. So yeah, my name is Adam Tucker. I'm with Healthcare Policy and Financing. And there I am. And so we're really excited about being here and continuing to publicly partner with everybody here, including the OEF and DVR and the Office of Behavioral Health and everything else. And since so much stuff has kind of already been covered, we really wanted to focus in on some of the things that we're partnering around improving the quality of the services that we're doing. And at some other later date, Medicaid is doing a lot of stuff around rate methodologies, around implementing customized employment as well as IPS. We would love to come back and talk about that specifically. But today we really wanted to kind of show some of the efforts that we're focusing in on in improving the quality of services, or especially specifically around training and data. And so the Colorado and the Employment First movement, and therefore HICPUF and DVR, received some extra funding and some direction from the legislative body, Colorado's legislative body, to implement some new provider qualifications as well as some training. And this is affectionately known as Senate Bill 18145. And so really what's embedded in that is it's more about professional development, spreading and strengthening the best practices that we have in the state, as well as really understanding the data so that we can really track some of the stuff, all of this stuff that we're really doing, making sure that we are, that the data is showing, or using the data to try to prove what we're doing is actually making a good effect on everything. So next slide. And so everything that we're doing, and when we set all of this up to ensure that the training is really around and based on best practices, we are making sure that all the trainings include these core competencies, around assessment and career planning, really making sure that the trainings are not just about job placement, not just about in kind of throwing away the idea that once somebody with a disability gets a job, it's a success and we're all ready to move on. That is a success for people to get a job, but we also need to slow down and start to really think about, in the state of Colorado, that people have careers, and how do we support people with not just their first job or their second job, but how do we support them with their career trajectory and moving forward. So again, the core competencies also cover those core values: employment engagement, job development, job coaching, and person-centered team approaches. All of those things we know through national data really support quality of services, and that really is what we want to focus on with training. So next slide, please. So again, professional development, supported employment vendors. So this really is set up for supported employment vendors and Medicaid providers. We are also making a push to make sure that both DVR vendors and Medicaid providers are the same group, so that individuals who need these services or utilize these services can effortlessly kind of move between these two systems without having to worry about meeting a new job coach or working with a new provider in general. So that's one of the big things that in Senate Bill 18145 in this training has really actually helped us navigate this and support providers in becoming either a DVR vendor and a Medicaid provider at the same time. Again, because this is based on national best practices, we want people to walk away from these trainings and use trainings that are nationally recognized, and walk away with a nationally recognized certification or certificate from these trainings. And that will also continue to help ensure that Colorado has the best supports of the highest quality. And then there is the reason for the pre-approval process. And one of the things that really sets Senate Bill 18145 and a lot of the employment work that we're doing in Colorado, specifically around training from other states, is that we're allowed, and we have been given funding to reimburse providers to actually go to these trainings. So if you're going to a full-on training, it's $1,200, and the hope is that covers the cost of the training, but it can also support covering wages of the employee when they're in the training, and or the travel time and all of those kinds of things. If you have the opportunity, you have the experience in supported employment, and all you really need to do is just go and get a certification through a test like the CESP certification. A reimbursement for that is $300. Again, the hope is that we can minimize the true cost to employers by not just supporting the the amount of the training or the certification process, but also wages and some travel. Again, these funds are not going to cover all of that. We are very aware of that, but that is the goal, to try to help mitigate this cost to providers who have been engaged in this for a long time. We didn't want this to add additional barriers for really committed providers utilizing and engaging with individuals around supported employment. So next slide, please. So again, all of these trainings, and as we continue to move through this, we have a couple of trainings that we know, including IPS training, customized, some parts of the customized employment training, even though customized employment, when you're thinking about customized employment, and this is an important piece. What we're talking about in Senate Bill 18145 is really the base when we're talking about training. We're talking about training 101. Let's get everybody kind of on the same page with kind of 101. When we're thinking about customized employment and what that training is, that is a more advanced set of training. Now, you can skip kind of 101 and go into customized employment. And if you work with us, we can ensure that it also meets the Senate Bill 18145 standards that have been set out. But just so that everybody know, we're actually thinking of this a little bit differently. And that not every time you utilize or go through Senate Bill 18145 will it set you up to be a customized employment provider. And I just want to point that piece out. But that we still believe in professional development, good professional development. We know that adds to job coaches and job developers sticking around for a little bit longer, as well as increasing the quality of these services overall. Next slide, please. So the other piece of Senate Bill 18145, which is also really exciting, is that it required the Colorado Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing to really start to look at some new data sets. And what that really meant for us is that we had to get creative, and we actually had to set up a whole new data tracking system to be able to actually drill down and get some of this data. Historically, healthcare policy and financing is really good with data when it comes to actual services. So if somebody goes to a doctor's office, we have really good data around that because that encounter is tracked, the cost is tracked, what any diagnoses that come out of that, any medications, all of that we're really good at tracking. But when we're trying to track stuff when it comes to supported employment, including things like wage, how long somebody has been working somewhere, how many hours they work a week, is it competitive integrated employment or is it another type of employment? All of those kinds of pieces, historically, healthcare policy and financing has not necessarily been that great at. And so we use this as an opportunity to kind of set up some new data sources. And that happened about 9 months ago. And we're already starting to get some of that data back. We knew going into it, it was going to take us a bit of time to ensure that we were, that we had good full data sets. And we are just now starting to really get data sets that we feel are a good representation of the state. And so actually our first data set that we got back was last week. And I just wanted to end my little talk here just really quick with just a preview of some of the data that we'll be releasing in the next month or so. And just so you guys know, you guys are the first ones to hear about this, but this is the piece of data that we've mined so far that I think is just so important. We know that right now, per year, per person, we're averaging, the average cost per person to utilize job coaching individual is about $88 a year. So that's how much healthcare and policy and financing on average is spending per person on individualized job coaching. Compare that to job coaching group, and that average is $78.82 per month. Oh, sorry, this is that per month, per year. And so we can see how small investment that HCPF is making, but how great the services and the outcomes are. And if we just base that on how much people are making, I think that this is also an interesting piece of data. For individuals who use job coaching individuals, and that's in HICPUF where we find competitive integrated employment, the average amount somebody is making a month is $849.21. You compare that to group job coaching, which is where we find non-competitive integrated employment, and the average that somebody is making in that setting is $502 a year. So just to point out that there is a big difference between somebody having competitive integrated work compared to somebody who is in competitive integrated work. And really, we have palpable evidence now that really does show that the average when you're looking at it is about $346.72 difference. And so that's, again, why we are so committed to competitive integrated employment and really supporting people in finding meaningful, competitive, integrated work for themselves so that they can find that pathway out of poverty. They can be, so people can find more connection to their community, and just be happier and healthier and more successful in the things that they want to do. So I wanted to share that with you guys. We will have more detailed data coming out. It's probably going to take us about another 3 weeks to actually get it to a place where we can share the full data with everybody. But please be paying attention for that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Megan.
Thanks, Adam. Hi, I'm Megan Green. I'm with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. I'm excited to be here today with you all. Next slide, please. I think probably 2 slides. That's me, that's my name. And this slide just kind of highlights DVR's vision and mission. Our vision, people with disabilities are essential to a working economy that elevates all of Colorado. Our mission, working together to promote a thriving employment environment with opportunity for every Coloradoan with a disability to live independently and prosper. We're excited that vision and mission kind of supports all of the different efforts and employment efforts that you're hearing about today. And we're excited to partner with all of the different partners that you're hearing from today on those efforts as well. Next slide, please. So DVR believes, these are kind of our belief statements that all people with disabilities can choose a career path leading to meaningful employment and independent living. And again, just really focusing on our partnership efforts with Employment First to help support kind of these belief statements. Next slide, please. So I am new to my role in DVR. I'm the Competitive and Integrated Employment Unit Manager. This is a new unit within the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. This unit is comprised of the Youth Services and Transition Unit, the Professional Learning and Development Unit, which is basically our internal training unit, and our Supported Employment First unit. The CIE unit kind of got together to come up with what we feel we really want to work on, and this is kind of our statement on what we're going to be doing as we move forward. So we will build and reinforce a firm foundation of knowledge, support a culture of ongoing growth and learning, provide mentorship, and foster innovation to empower DVR to work together to deliver high-quality services that support the mission and vision with services that promote opportunity for each and every Coloradoan to prosper within each of those different subunits within our overarching competitive and integrated employment unit. Next slide, please. So the project search is kind of the first area we wanted to highlight within our youth services department. Project Search, as you may know, is an innovative school-to-work transition program for high school students with significant disabilities. The program is dedicated to workforce development that benefits the individual. The goal for each program participant is competitive and integrated employment. To reach that goal, the program provides real-life work experiences combined with training and employability and independent living skills to help young people with significant disabilities make successful transitions to productive adult life. The Project Search model involves an extensive period of skills training and career exploration with innovative adaptations and long-term job coaching. Currently, the Colorado Project Search sites are with UC Health Denver, Children's Hospital Denver, and Columbine Healthcare Systems in Fort Collins. The most recent data poll for us with Project Search was from the school year 9 to 10 through school year 16-17. So the total participants between that time period completed Project Search were 109. 73 of those individuals were employed from the program, which is 67%. The average wage of those individuals was $9.18, and the average hours a week that those individuals were working were 18.6. Next slide, please. This is a slide we just wanted to highlight a success story of an individual in the Project Search program, Taryn Lawhorn, and all of her great work and achievements. She joined the Children's Hospital Project Search Initiative while she was a senior at Hinckley High School. And she was introduced to Project Search after being in retail prior, and getting the opportunity at Children's, she says, was her dream to work in a hospital. So she's been a cafeteria porter for the last 5 years, and she loves being around new patients and families and enjoys her coworkers. Next slide, please. Maintaining optimism during COVID-19. So she, with the pandemic, it has temporarily interrupted Taryn's work at Children's, but her and her coach, Ellen Molesky from Continue of Colorado, meet weekly over Zoom platform to plan her return to work and maintain communication practices. When she returns, she'll add kind of that new daily step of going through the hospital's health check procedures, such as getting a temperature check. Next slide, please. So with the new competitive and integrated employment unit within DVR, we are working on similar webinars like the one we're doing here with you all today within our DVR staff and internal staff throughout the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. So we'll be partnering with the Colorado Office of Employment First and national subject matter experts to provide education and training to all of DVR on Employment First efforts, and that'll be happening this summer. We will also be cross-training between our CIE unit on youth services, employment first and supported employment services, and internal training practices, so that we're all confident and up to speed on the latest evidence-based practices to help foster and mentor other staff within the agency statewide. We are also fostering DVR subject matter experts, including our business outreach specialists and the DVR business relations unit on Employment First and customized employment and individual placement and supports models. We are also participating in the VOICE projects, which is the visionary opportunities to increase competitive employment, and have been working on governor's proclamation related to the individual placement and supports model being best practices for behavioral health employment supports in the state of Colorado. Next slide, please. The future of customized employment. Like Adam said, a lot of this has already kind of been gone over previous, so I'll just go through it quickly because Brian did already a great job explaining all of the different great projects happening with customized employment. But we're partnering with Brian and Patricia and the Colorado Office of Employment First to complete the pilot for customized employment services and training. We're working to build consistency for our internal training for internal DVR staff across the state and our local offices. With Darby Remley, who was recently hired as our new IDD Supported Employment Trainer Coordinator. We are working to increase capacity and sustainability of customized employment as a service to individuals with significant disabilities who have not been able to be successful with general supported employment services, and really supporting our counselors with training and mentoring on what that looks like in that model. The ultimate goal is, again, as Brian had mentioned, an increase in the number of individuals with most significant disabilities employed in competitive and integrated employment through those strategies. Next slide, please. So benefits counseling, just to kind of briefly add to what Melanie already went over a little bit, we have Ann Christensen, who is our internal benefits counseling program coordinator, and she's been actively partnering with Colorado Office of Employment First and Melanie and APSE and other stakeholders to develop kind of a comprehensive plan with primary goals of increasing capacity and improving service delivery components of benefits counseling for DVR staff and just general staff knowledge of what benefits counseling and planning looks like. She does a Ann's Benefits Bonanza in our monthly broadcasts, highlighting different areas of benefits counseling to increase that staff knowledge and awareness related to the supports and efforts of benefits counseling services. Coordinated efforts to increase awareness of benefits counseling as vital tool for clients will continue with Ann's support. And as Melanie mentioned previous, we do have benefits counseling in our fee schedule. It is something that we can pay for directly. It's a service that typically involves an analysis of the individual's current SSI and SSDI benefits, as well as other benefits, to ensure that individuals are aware and understanding of how employment will affect their benefits and support them. That payment rate is up to $100 per hour, and it covers components of all that benefits counseling, including the preparation of periodic written reports. Next slide, please. IPS, again, we partner with Deirdre and the Colorado Office of Employment First closely, as well as Aaliyah and Paul with the Office of Behavioral Health on all of the wonderful IPS services and supports in Colorado. But within DVR, kind of the main focus that our IPS program is with Rachel Horde, our mental health, behavioral health, supported employment trainer coordinator. Works on is supporting 15 mental health supported employment contracts statewide, and 11 of those 15 contracts actually implement the IPS model. We also coordinate and work with Easter Seals on a dual diagnosis pilot implementing IPS with IDD clients as well as behavioral health diagnoses. Rachel Horde has been implementing a tiered IPS training for internal DVR staff for awareness and understanding and support and mentorship in the model. Rachel also partners with Paul and Aaliyah with the Office of Behavioral Health to complete fidelity reviews across the state, and is certified in IPS Employment Center and IPS. And from July 1st, 2019 through March 31st, 2020, DVR mental health supported employment contracts have served 950 individuals and have successfully closed 118 in jobs of their choosing, competitive employment, integrated employment jobs of their choosing. Next slide, please. State as a model employer. So as Bob had highlighted in his presentation, the EFAP recommendations for the state of Colorado becoming a model employer and the implementation of the state advisor on disability employment position within DVR was created from that recommendation. So that individual is Caitlin Adams with DVR, and she's tasked with leading the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment in developing and implementing employment practices that result in the state of Colorado becoming a model employer. In order to become a model employer for individuals with disabilities, she's been focusing on 6 key areas: outreach and recruitment, application evaluation, interviewing and hiring, retention and promotion, accessibility and reasonable accommodations, and ADA coordination, as well as inclusive workplace culture and collaboration outside CDLE. Caitlin put together a chart on the next slide that kind of outlines each different initiatives that are in each of those 6 key areas. Next slide, please, and we'll look at those. So in each of those key areas that she's working on, so with outreach and recruitment, she's been working on agency recruitment, on an agency recruitment and outreach group, which is comprised of different representatives throughout the state. And that group is currently creating a series of videos that will help individuals apply for state jobs and focus on state hiring process and human resource side of things. The application evaluation and interviewing and hiring key area, legislation has been drafted and filed that will allow CDLE to develop and run a pilot for disability employment hiring incentive for individuals with disabilities in state employment. This bill is being sponsored by Senator Jesse Danielson and Representative Mary Young, and is included in the same bill as the Employment First Advisory Partnership reauthorization. Retention and promotion. CDLE is an early adopter of Colorado Equity Alliance's new hiring guide and retention guide. And CDLE will work with 5 other agencies to implement those strategies with diverse hiring and retention. For accessibility and accommodation, Caitlin has developed an addendum to CDLE's reasonable accommodation policy specifically for DVR, which includes requirements on monitoring and confidentiality, training, harassment, and retaliation, as well as information on a fragrance-free environment. And training is currently being developed to implement DVR and statewide. Inclusive workplace culture. So the state advisor, DPA and Colorado Equity Alliance developed a new inclusive policy statement and reasonable accommodation language that will be included in all state materials, including job announcements moving forward. And then lastly, collaboration outside CDLE. So this is exciting. Mark your calendars. Over the last year, DVR, the Lieutenant Governor, and the Office of Film, Television, and Media worked with the filmmaker Matt Getze to create a short film titled Untapped Resources. The film highlights individuals working with disabilities in various industries all across the state. The film will premiere on Rocky Mountain PBS on July 2nd, coming up pretty soon at 8:30 p.m. And then on the last slide, it just kind of highlights all the different individuals that are working on all those different initiatives within DVR and partnering with all the great partners here on this webinar, and the contact information to reach out, as well as our DVR website. And from there, I will turn it over to the Department of Human Services and Karen Farrington with MindSource.
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
We can, Karen.
I can hear you, Karen.
Okay, super. I wanted to just kick off a quick presentation from two divisions at the Department of Human Services. One of them is MindSource Brain Injury Network, and this organization may or may not be on your radar. We're the lead state agency on brain injury for Colorado, and have been since an executive order was written for that in the early 2000s. We get most of our resources from surcharges on different moving violations, and those just so happen to be the kinds of moving violations that also result in brain injury. So we use those funds to be able to deliver services to individuals with brain injury, and we currently do that through our contractor at the Brain Injury Alliance of Colorado. I can be available for lots more information about those specific services, but today I'm really just talking about our efforts that align with the Employment First initiative. And what's exciting for me is that that Employment First in Colorado has always been cross-disability focused from the very beginning. So therefore, MindSource has been at the table since those early years of really conceptualizing what Employment First could look like in Colorado. Next slide, please. I wanted to just give you a little bit of information about what's happening right now with MindSource Brain Injury Network that's relevant to this initiative. And this is built within our state plan that was just released earlier this year. We had a 20-member board. About half of those individuals on our board had lived experience with brain injury. And over about a year and a half, they met to develop our state plan priorities. We got public input, and we've now got our state plan that's focused on 3 broad areas. And the link for that state plan is at our website at MindSource Brain Injury Network Colorado.org. I can put that into the chat during the question and answer period as well. But what I wanted to highlight for you all is one section of our state plan that really focuses in on employment. And that will have us over the course of this state plan period working very closely with DVR and the Office of Employment First to expand opportunities to enhance employment supports for people specifically with brain injury. We know how important this work is, and one part of that is in the second bullet, which is making sure that people with brain injuries really understand that work information as it relates to their benefits. And so the work that and the discussions that we had earlier with Melanie are very relevant to our state plan as we go forward and really try to promote different opportunities to expand employment for this population. On the next slide, you've heard Deirdre and Aaron, excuse me, both talk about the IPS program and the expansion of these types of services that are very rapid engagement oriented, very person-centered. And we have the opportunity this year to try out this intervention, this type of service delivery with people that have brain injuries. And we're doing that through something that was earlier mentioned, the Visionary Opportunities to Increase Competitive Employment, or VOICE. And what we're doing with that project that really just kicked off last week is that we're working with the Mental Health Center of Denver and DVR, and we're essentially working to identify people that have brain injuries among the individuals that are entering into IPS services at MHCD. So a couple of quick screens are being used to identify those individuals that have brain injury, but the most important part of what's happening is that based on that information, the employment specialists get tailored information about how to best work with those individuals that may have symptoms related to brain injury. The last thing I'll just mention that just wanted to put on your radar is that Colorado is expanding its definition of brain injury and did so in a bill earlier this year. We don't look at brain injury any longer in Colorado as just traumatic brain injury, but rather acquired brain injury. And that means that people with non-traumatic brain injuries who have very similar sometimes struggles or symptoms that people with traumatic brain injuries do will ultimately and over time be able to access the same kinds of supports and services. So with that, just a brief overview. I want to hand it over to my other CDHS partner colleague, and that is Aaliyah Andrews.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for hanging in there. I am as well going to be pretty quick here. I work for the Office of Behavioral Health, so our main mission at the Office of Behavioral Health is behavioral health. So next slide, please. Oh, next slide, please. I just wanted to start off with a little bit of success story here. When you are working, you are a part of the real world. You feel connected. Having a job gives me stability, and I have something to look for every day. This was an IPS consumer. I'm sorry, I should have said that first. The Office of Behavioral Health works with IPS. So that's going to be my main focus today. And I'm actually just going to talk a tiny bit about funding and then a little bit about the fidelity reviews and how we try to keep a good fidelity here. But I wanted to mention that this quote is a really good example of working being a social determinant of health. And you've heard a lot of people talk about that already today. So, and then the employment counselor helped me understand why Tony paces. It's okay in the security business. This is an employer of somebody who works with the office with an IPS specialist. And I really like this one because it brings up two of the important pieces of IPS. One is individualized job search. So this client was obviously individualized. So he was put in a place where he could be himself. And also the second thing about this is that the employment specialist did a really good job in regards to job development. Whoever this employment specialist was really picked the right employer so he could go in and talk on the client's behalf. Next slide, please. Okay, OBH contracts with the community mental health centers around the state and a lot of other things, but since we're focused on IPS today, I'm just going to talk about that. Deirdre already had a slide up with the 12 community mental health centers that we contract with, and so we can fund them through their own indigent funds. So that's kind of how we fund that, along with other funding that goes into IPS, but I'm not going to get into that. So next slide, please. Okay, fidelity reviews. Fidelity. This this is the fun piece. So we have 2-day fidelity reviews. It's super extensive. There's 25 item fidelity scale. And when Deirdre talked about the 8 principles of IPS, I think a lot of them are kind of intertwined with the 25 item scale. I'm definitely not going to go over all of it because it would take too long. But you can have up to, each scale is 5 points. You can get up to 125, and the goal is always to get to 100 for good fidelity. And so if you get good fidelity, 100 or above, then we go ahead and get, we get to, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of looking at the time, so I'm trying to, okay, so the fidelity, I have to stop for 2 seconds. So the fidelity scale, if you get good fidelity, we come back in a year. And if you don't get to good fidelity, which is totally fine, then we're going to go ahead and come back in 6 months. So the annual reviews, we do interviews with the employment specialists, DVR counselors, benefits counselors, therapists, everybody that's involved in IPS. We are going to interview. We job develop with the clients. Or not with the clients, I'm sorry, with the employment specialists. We look at consumer charts and all of the program data. So we're looking at everything involved in this. And we have a report that is a mechanism to explain scores and highlights both with the strengths and weaknesses of this. So fidelity is defined as a degree to which the service model is implemented and intended. So that's what we're looking at. And then better implemented programs with higher fidelity have better outcomes. Next slide. I, at OBH, provide technical assistance, and technical assistance it means that I'm always available for any questions in regards to the IPS program at the centers or anything that they need. And then we have a supervisor meeting once a month where they can ask questions or I can assist in any way. And a lot of time I go to the providers before and after the reviews so we can kind of get them set up for success, or we can have them have, and then we can look for an action plan after that. So next slide. Okay, so just in summary, OBH is a piece of the puzzle that funds IPS. We fund IPS with Medicaid and DVR, and OBH is here to support IPS providers all around the state to reach and maintain high fidelity. Thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Patricia.
Thanks, Talia. This is Patricia. Actually, Erin's going to help us with moderating the questions that have come in the chat box. So take it away, Erin.
Thank you. Yeah, we had some great questions come in earlier. I'm first going to start with Melanie. There were a lot of questions about how you become a CPWIC, and then also how benefits counseling is paid for. So Melanie, if you could just do a minute or two kind of answering those 2 questions about becoming a CPWIC and then how benefits counseling is paid for clients.
Yep, I can cover that. So a couple of different things right now, like I mentioned and Megan mentioned as well, benefits counseling is covered through the DVR fee schedule. At $100 an hour. And the other way to get benefits counseling services through Colorado is through what's called the WIPA project. WIPA is an acronym. It stands for Work Incentives Planning and Assistance. And the Social Security Administration funds that program. And so because Social Security funds that program, they can put stipulations on who gets served and how that service is provided. And with DVRs, if they're paying for it, they're obviously setting the standard for what the service needs to look like. That being said, whether you receive services through DVR or through the WIPA project,
All providers through those two programs are certified through Virginia Commonwealth University, or VCU. DVR recognizes VCU, and SSA, the Social Security Administration recognizes VCU as the provider for certification process for benefits counseling. There are other providers out there that provide a similar or a certification service, but VCU is the one recognized by Social Security and Colorado DVR. So to get services, if you're a person receiving benefits, you could go through the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation if you're an eligible job seeker through them, or you can get the free service if you're actively receiving SSI, or I should say actively eligible for SSI or SSDI benefits, those two big ones. You can get that through the WIPA project. The handout that I mentioned in my presentation, it's called the Benefits Counseling Guide. That's a great tool that you can access that has all of this information on it, and it has the names and contact information for all of those DVR vendor and WIPA project providers in our state. So that'll be a great resource that you'll get from this presentation today, or you can access it through the website that I provided, or you can contact me and I'd gladly get that to you. As for getting certified, you can certify through Virginia Commonwealth University. It's a free certification to get. That being said, there's an issue right now with getting that certification because it was provided in person, and it would be a week-long, 40-hour per week training that you would complete. And because of COVID-19 and our new normal, that has to go to virtual. And so everything was kind of put on hold. If, like for example, my colleague Teresa was signed up to take that training, and then it was canceled because everything in person had to be canceled. So that's one way to get certified, and that certification at this point in time is probably the best one in Colorado because that's what's recognized in Colorado through DVR. So as we send out the Q&A, I can provide some more links for that information, so you can check out the website where that all that information is, and get you some more information. One other thing is the Virginia Commonwealth University does provide an online free introduction to benefits counseling and how work affects SSI and SSDI. So that's a great resource if you've got some time to go through some modules. I believe it's been a while since I've taken it, but I believe it takes about a week. I think there's 6 modules. You do them on your own. It's all free, but it's a great way to learn. So we can provide you with that information as well. So Erin, does that cover what you asked me to cover?
Yes, it's excellent.
Okay, thanks.
A lot of questions about benefits counseling. So I know that we did not get to everyone's questions today. We had so much great information, but your questions, we value them and we want to respond to them. So what we will be doing is compiling this list of questions that I have. We will be answering them in a document and then having JFK Partners distribute that document so we ensure all of your questions are answered. We appreciate all of your time today. The Colorado Office of Employment First is grateful to be able to partner with JFK Partners on this CANDO presentation, and we look forward to having you all on future webinars and to being able to continue the important work of Employment First here in Colorado. So I'm going to turn it back over to JFK Partners if they need to wrap anything up, but we appreciate your time today. Okay, doesn't sound like we need to do anything else. Thank you so much, everyone.